fighting people while we stand together.
She was the symbol of a mighty empire. The queen who defeated the Spanish Armada and opened a golden age of culture and art. But behind the radiant portraits and the lines of praise lies a terrifying truth that history rarely mentions. The body of Elizabeth I, the indomitable Virgin Queen, slowly rotted while she was still alive. Her foul breath forced envoys to hold their breath. Her wigs became nests for insects, and her porcelain-white skin was created from poison that ate away at her flesh. This is not only the story of physical decay, but also the tragedy of a woman obsessed with power, image, and the fear of being seen as weak. Today, we will lift the veil of glory to uncover the horrifying end of one of England's greatest monarchs. In the middle of the 16th century, England was plunged into religious and political turmoil. Blood had been shed. The throne had once wavered, and the future of an entire dynasty stood on the edge of an abyss. In that context, Elizabeth I ascended the throne as an indomitable figure. She was not only the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, two names bound to tragedy and scandal, but also a woman who had to prove herself in a world dominated by men. Elizabeth reigned for more than 4 decades. Under her rule, England defeated the Spanish Armada, expanded its influence across the seas, and built a brilliant culture that we still call today the Elizabethan Golden Age. Shakespeare wrote plays for that era. Explorers carried the English flag across the world, and in the eyes of the people, Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen, the embodiment of strength, intelligence, and immortal beauty. But the truth behind the oil paintings, the verses of praise, and the thick layers of cosmetics was a completely different story. A truth that made foreign envoys shudder when faced with it, and that courtiers dared only whisper about behind closed doors. It was the truth of a body rotting away, of a queen driven into tragedy by her own obsession with image. And that is the journey. We will unveil the horrific decline of Elizabeth I, the woman who died in the very decay of power and fear. Imagine, you are a foreign envoy stepping into the great hall of the English court in the year 1580. Before you stands a woman in a splendid gown, her red hair blazing like fire, her eyes carrying the proud gaze of one who rules an empire. But the moment Queen Elizabeth opens her mouth, a wave of rotten stench crashes forward like a fist striking the stomach. Surviving diplomatic letters describe, "The Queen's mouth is no different from a grave of decaying corpses." The cause came from something seemingly harmless: sugar. In the 16th century, sugar was a symbol of wealth, so luxurious that only royalty and the upper classes could afford it, and Elizabeth was addicted to it. She ate cakes, yums, candies, drank wine soaked in sugar, all of which destroyed her tooth enamel from her early 20s. In an age without toothbrushes and toothpaste, people relied on salt, charcoal, or even urine to scrub their teeth. But Elizabeth trusted in a sweet remedy. She used honey to protect her enamel. Instead of saving it, it accelerated the decay. By the age of 40, many of her teeth had fallen out, and the rest were blackened, broken stumps, resembling charred steaks on a battlefield. The pain tormented her at every meal. Even soft bread made her grimace, and roasted meat was utterly impossible. Palace cooks were forced to mash and overboil every dish until it became a thick, greyish porridge. Yet no one dared to speak. For courtier, silence was a command of survival. When royal physicians advised extraction, Elizabeth grew furious. One dared to demonstrate by pulling out his own tooth to reassure the Queen. The result, he collapsed in agony and blood loss, while Elizabeth only smirked, her eyes glinting with coldness. It was not pain she feared, but weakness. In the world of power, showing pain meant losing the aura of invincibility. And so, Instead of treatment, Elizabeth concealed it. She chewed cloves, held herbs in her mouth, rubbed rose petals along her gums. At Bonke, she used custom-made silver cutlery to pose with elegance, but all efforts were futile. The breath of death still spread, forcing diplomats to wince and ladies in waiting to endure silently. A Spanish envoy wrote, "She is a radiant queen, but her mouth is a cemetery." That decayed mouth not only ruined royal feasts, but also robbed Elizabeth of one of her greatest weapons, her speech. The queen, once famed for her eloquence, was now forced to eat behind a silk curtain, her voice growing slurred and strained. Even Shakespeare, Herr devoted admire, had to choose his words carefully so as not to reveal the distorted speech of the queen. In the mind of the modern person, water symbolizes purity, but for Elizabeth I, water was a deadly threat. She believed that water could seep through the pores, ruin flesh and blood, and even cause the soul to drown from within. That belief did not only stem from medieval superstition, but was reinforced by royal physicians, those who advised her to avoid bathing because the body would never dry again. And so Elizabeth turned that fear into a way of life. She did not bathe in the usual sense, but replaced it with a perfumed ritual. Ash morning, attendants prepared cloths soaked in wine, vinegar, and rose water. Instead of cleansing sweat, they dabbed her skin so that fragrance would mask the odor. Her garments were not washed regularly, but were infused with resin, frankincense, musk, and sandalwood to conceal the musty scent clinging to her flesh. But fragrance only covered, never erased. In the palace, foreign guests who entered her chamber often described a smell of sickly sweet rot, like wilted roses mixed with decomposing animals. It was the stench of a body left unwashed for many months. Elizabeth owned a precious porcelain bath, carved with golden angels. But it was almost only for display. On the rare occasions she immersed herself, the ritual unfolded like a ceremony, water sprinkled with petals, blessed by a priest, and never changed. When the fragrance faded, attendants poured in more resin, musk, and ambergris, turning the bath into a thick soup, where her body soaked in a mixture of rotting flowers, oils, and sour decay. One lady-in-waiting once exclaimed that the Queen's nightgown, soaked with sweat and perfume, had stiffened so much it could stand upright on its own. But Elizabeth did not see that as filth. In her eyes, fragrance was purity, and body odor was considered a sacred sign of strength. This contradiction created a strange paradox. While she forbade courtiers from exposing any trace of body odor and punished anyone who entered court with foul breath, Elizabeth herself exuded a stench that many foreign envoys struggled to endure. One described her chamber as a tomb filled with wilted flowers. Yet Elizabeth remained proud. She believed fragrance was the weapon that upheld her immortal image. For her, cleanliness did not lie in washing, but in maintaining illusion. Water was the danger, perfume was salvation, and from that belief, her body slowly transformed into a living corpse, hidden beneath overwhelming fragrance. If perfume was the veil that concealed foul odor, then cosmetics were the final armor of Elizabeth I against irreversible decay. The 16th century called it Venetian ceruse, a bright white mixture made from vinegar and lead. In the flickering candlelight, it transformed a woman's face into ivory, smooth and radiant, evoking a beauty beyond the mortal. But in truth, it was poison, slowly corroding the body. Elizabeth began using it after she contracted smallpox at 29. She survived, but her face was left with pitted scars that threw the Queen into panic. For a woman who regarded herself as the body of the nation, Any imperfection was a threat to the throne. And so she smeared her face with a thick layer of white powder, day after day, year after year, until it became a permanent mask. Beneath the lid, her flesh dried, cracked, and festered with bleeding sores. But Elisabeth never washed it away completely. She only added new layers over the old, turning her true face into a hidden necrotic wasteland. One lady in waiting once recounted, when wiping away a patch of powder from the queen's cheek, beneathly peeling skin, inflamed, Alzing. Horrified, she was instantly struck across the face by the queen and banished from the court. Along with ceruse, Elisabeth used lipstick made from mercury sulfide, eyeliner of charcoal mixed with ash, and eye drops from belladonna extract to make her eyes glisten. Every ingredient was toxic, seeping through the skin and into the blood. The result was a body trembling, hands curling, a mind clouded. Yet Elisabeth remained resolute. My face is my kingdom. Thus, the portraits painted in her final years, the ghostly white face, the frozen smile, the distant eyes, did not reflect serenity, but a visage locked by pain. It was no longer a living face, but the mask of a corpse, sustained by lead and mercury. To preserve that image, she even ordered mirrors banned from her chambers, forbidding anyone, even herself, from seeing the truth. In the eyes of her subjects, she remained the immortal Virgin Queen. But in the shadows, beneath layers of cosmetics, her flesh had rotted away, and the very poisons of her beauty rituals slowly poisoned her body until her final breath. If the ghostly white face was the mask concealing decay, then Elisabeth's wigs were the final crown of illusion, both a symbol of power and a silent nest of disease consuming her body. By the age of 30, the fiery red hair that once made Elisabeth radiant in the eyes of her court began to fall out. The cause lay in the very toxic cosmetics she applied daily: lead, mercury, sulfur, and charcoal clogged her scalp, suffocating the hair follicles. Each stroke of the comb brought down clumps of hair. For a queen, hair was not merely adornment, it was a symbol of vitality and authority. Elisabeth understood this well. Terrified, she quickly found a solution: wigs. From a few simple pieces, they multiplied into dozens, then hundreds of increasingly elaborate styles. Some were so tall the chapel ceiling had to be altered for the queen to pass through. Some weighed nearly 10 kilograms, requiring steel frames fixed around her shoulders to support them. They were curled into spirals, adorned with pearls, embroidered with gold, dusted with white powder, a living crown fashioned from human hair, horsehair, even hair taken from corpses. But beneath this splendor lurked a horrifying truth. The wigs were never washed, for water could deform them. Instead, ladies in waiting sprinkled them with scented powders, lavender oil, and resins to mask the odor. Yet the dampness from sweat and starch created the perfect breeding ground for lice, fleas, and maggots. One court servant once swore she saw pale larvae writhing along the edge of the wig, right against the queen's scalp. But no one dared utter a word. To even hint that Elisabeth was foul or filthy meant exile or death. And so, every morning, the ritual of donning the wig unfolded like a sacred ceremony. 2 maids, 3 guards, and a priest in attendance. The wig was prayed over, perfumed with incense, and only then placed upon the queen's head. If a strand of hair fell, it was buried as a relic. Beneath, Elisabeth's scalp split open, Ozinkpus, ulcerated down to the bone. Many times she fainted in court from infection. Yet upon waking, her first command remained, "Put back my hair." For Elizabeth, the wig was no longer an accessory. It was the final shell of the throne. And so, on the head of one of history's greatest monarchs, vermin thrived in silence. A radiant throne. But beneath the powders and wigs, power itself had become a prison, and the Queen's body had turned into rotting ground for parasites to inhabit. In March of 1603, after more than 4 decades of rule, Elizabeth I was exhausted. She no longer ate, did not sleep, and refused both water and medicine. She lay motionless on a bed draped in red velvet, her eyes sunken, her lips cracked, able only to whisper, "If I close my eyes, they will never open again." And she was right. Death came quietly, but the silence did not last. Only a few hours after her final breath, the Queen's body began to transform in ways that terrified her attendants. Her face swelled, her lips turned dark purple, and thick fluids seeped from her nose and the corners of her mouth. The stench of death quickly overwhelmed the resin and incense. Her guards desperately burned. The reason was not difficult to understand for many years. Elizabeth had turned her body into a living vessel of poison, lead, mercury, charcoal powder, mouldy resins, wine laced with perfumes. All had seeped into her blood and flesh, destroying her liver, lungs, and bones. When life departed, the very chemicals that had kept her standing collapsed at once, causing decay to accelerate at a terrifying pace. Ladies in waiting recalled that the velvet-lined coffin had to be replaced after just 1 day. As black fluids seeped through the fabric, the guards at her bier were ordered to change shifts constantly, as none could endure the stench, even in the cold winds of early spring. Some soldiers, escorting the procession, confessed they vomited in the streets as the coffin passed. A clergyman quietly recorded, "England has lost its queen, but it has also lost the eternal image of purity. Her corpse is the proof of illusion's deceit." Even so, the funeral rites had to proceed. Elizabeth was carried through the streets of London in a solemn procession, her coffin draped in red and gold silk, covered with white flowers. The people wept, bowed low, and believed they were bidding farewell to a goddess. No one was allowed to know that only a veil of mourning cloth away. Her body had nearly liquefied, and swarms of flies gathered thickly around the bier. At last, the Queen was buried at Westminster Abbey, beside her half-sister Mary I. Outwardly, she rested in glory, but those who prepared her remains knew the truth. The death of Elizabeth I was not the peaceful closing of a golden age. It was a ghastly end, where the fragrance of power mingled with the stench of decay. Elizabeth I led England into a golden age, etching her name in history as one of the greatest monarchs. But her death also exposed a stark truth. Power could not halt decay, and beauty could not defy time. Beneath the layers of powder and the crown, the immortal Virgin Queen was still only a withering body. And it was in that very contrast between splendor and rot that the eternal tragedy of Elizabeth I became history's warning.